Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kane's most secret Phyllis project. Audra tells Nate about it. Reveal that Audra Charles tells Nate Hastings about the top secret project that Kane Ashby is working on for Phyllis Summers. Let's start by talking about the instructions that Kane has for Phyllis because he is going to give her a task. It is now time to put good planning into action and get closer to Kane's takeover goals after Phyllis and Kane planned well. Will the little shopping in enemy territory that Kane mentioned using Phyllis' hacking skills be the first task he completes? Is there anything else Kane wants Phyllis to do first? In any event, on Friday's Y&R episode, Kane will have a top-secret project for Phyllis to work on. Phyllis will probably pass Kane's test because it will provide her an opportunity to demonstrate her loyalty and value. He will be there for Audra when Nate is in a difficult situation. Audra often tells lies in an effort to get out of trouble or at least delay the inevitable. But since Nate is following his instincts and can see that Audra isn't telling him the truth, that won't work this time. As a result, Nate will demand candor from Audra and possibly warn her that their relationship cannot advance without it. Audra may find herself in a situation where she will most likely lose Nate. Even while Nate will no longer tolerate the lies, Audra won't benefit much from the truth either. However, it appears that Audra will realize that her only choice is to confess. Audra ought to acknowledge that Claire Newman was correct when Victor Newman hired her to separate Claire and Kyle Abbott after Nate puts further pressure on her. Audra may also admit to starting it and try to apologize for all the turmoil she's caused. She also kissed Kyle in an effort to stir things up. Nate may have an issue because Audra doesn't appear to be terribly sorry for any of it. Even if Audra tries to cry and say sorry, Nate might think she's just sad she was caught. Kane Ashby had never been one to leave things to chance, and when it came to his most recent power play, keeping things quiet was not only important, but it was also necessary for his own survival. Phyllis Summers, despite her turbulent past, still craved the thrill of being at the center of something dangerous and meaningful, so he had spent weeks sketching out plans on hidden drives and encrypted files. Kane had approached her with what he called a top-secret project, something no one else could know about, not even those closest to him, and Phyllis had jumped at the chance, eager to prove that she still had value beyond her usual manipulations and schemes. Kane needed her to go shopping in enemy territory, not for jewels or files in a safe, but for digital treasure buried deep within a competitor's network. His first directive was straightforward but led with risk. Phyllis, with her notorious hacking skills, was the perfect soldier for this mission. Though Kane's tone when he briefed her made it clear this wasn't just a test of skill, it was a test of loyalty. If she could execute flawlessly, she'd prove she was not only worth trusting but also essential to the larger takeover goals Kane had been plotting. But if she slipped, it wouldn't just be her reputation on the line, it could unravel everything he had built in secret. Kane's obsession with precision made him hover over every detail, laying out the plan with military-like sharpness. Infiltrate the targeted servers, extract the confidential files, plant subtle misinformation, and leave no trace behind. The challenge was intoxicating for Phyllis. It was the first move in a game of chess that Kane wanted to win against opponents who thought he was weak and forgotten. Meanwhile, across town, Audra Charles was busy fighting a different battle, one of hearts and half-truths. Nate Hastings had been circling her with a mixture of charm and suspicion, his instincts sharper than she wanted to admit, and her usual arsenal of excuses and diversions was beginning to fail. Nate could read people better than most, and each time Audra tried to twist a story, he picked apart the inconsistencies with the calm precision of a surgeon. She knew she was close to losing him, not because of one specific lie but because of the pattern of deception that had woven itself into their entire relationship. The real breaking point came when Nate, unwilling to play games any longer, confronted her directly. He made it clear to her that their relationship would never progress unless she was completely honest. Audra, cornered and tired of dancing around the truth, realized she had no other option but to confess. What she said next would shock Nate, not just because of the content but because of the ripple effects it could create. Audra admitted that Kane's secret project wasn't just between him and Phyllis. She knew about it, and more importantly, she understood what it meant for everyone tangled in this messy web of alliances. She explained that Kane had been orchestrating moves with Phyllis to destabilize key players in Genoa City, starting with the hacking mission. But she didn't stop there. Audra also admitted that Victor Newman had hired her specifically to sabotage Claire Newman's blossoming relationship with Kyle Abbott, something Claire had long suspected but couldn't prove. Audra, in a moment of vulnerability, acknowledged Claire had been right all along, that she had deliberately stepped in to pull Kyle away with carefully timed distractions, including a kiss designed to stir confusion. Nate listened in silence, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the confessions. For him, the issue wasn't just the schemes. It was the fact that Audra had only come clean now, when her back was against the wall. He questioned whether she was truly sorry or simply upset that her lies had been exposed. Audra tried to frame it as remorse, her voice breaking as she insisted she never meant for things to go this far, that she got swept up in power plays orchestrated by men like Victor and Kane. But Nate wasn't convinced. His voice grew firm as he told her that a relationship built on lies was doomed, no matter how many tears were shed after the fact. He saw through her act, believing she regretted being caught more than she regretted the damage she caused. And yet, even as he chastised her, a part of him couldn't ignore the bombshell she had dropped about Kane and Phyllis. Kane's secret project represented more than just corporate sabotage. It was a declaration of war. And Nate, caught between loyalty to his principles and his entanglements with Audra, knew the fallout could reach him whether he wanted it to or not. As Audra finished her confession, the weight of her words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. She had exposed Kane's covert directives, Phyllis's role as his hacker, and her own complicity in schemes against Claire and Kyle. She had done it all under the pressure of Nate's demand for honesty, but the irony wasn't lost on her. The truth might cost her the very thing she was fighting to save. Nate was at a crossroads, unsure of whether to use the information Audra had shared with him to help others or to treat it as a poisoned gift, like one that binds you to a person you no longer trust. Meanwhile, Kane and Phyllis continued with their clandestine mission, unaware that their supposedly airtight project had just been cracked open by a woman whose survival instinct had forced her to trade secrets for a chance at keeping a man's respect. The drama was far from over. Kane's test for Phyllis had only just begun, and Audra's confession to Nate was the first domino to fall in a chain reaction that could either cement Kane's rise to power or expose him to enemies eager to see him destroyed. Kane's operation with Phyllis was far more than the simple little shopping trip he had joked about. It was the backbone of his larger strategy to reclaim power, prestige, and control in Genoa City, a city that had too often written him off as a man who made too many mistakes and lost too much credibility. In reality, Kane had been carefully studying his adversaries, waiting for the moment to strike, and Phyllis was the perfect weapon to deploy at the start of his campaign. The task he assigned her wasn't just about breaking into some company's server or collecting data. It was about dismantling trust networks and planting digital poison where his enemies least expected it. Kane's ultimate targets were Victor Newman's empire and, indirectly, the Abbott family's intertwined interests, because both families represented structures of power that had left Kane marginalized. By sending Phyllis to infiltrate databases connected to Newman Media, Chancellor Winters, and even Jabot subsidiaries, he could obtain blackmail material, financial leverage, and the means to create chaos among his rivals. Phyllis, for all her flaws, had the brilliance to make it happen, and though she usually played for her own survival, she found herself oddly aligned with Kane's vision, perhaps because she, too, was tired of being underestimated and cast aside. Late nights in front of glowing monitors became their new battlefield, with Kane hovering at her side like a general overseeing a trusted soldier. "This isn't just about files," he reminded her in a low, sharp tone. "It's about proving you can follow orders without question." For Phyllis, that cut deep. Loyalty was not her strong suit, but she knew Kane would drop her the second he suspected disloyalty. She worked tirelessly, tracing backdoor entry points into encrypted servers, layering her tracks, and creating false flags that pointed to foreign hackers instead of herself. Kane was impressed, though he didn't show it, his poker face always in place. What made this operation especially dangerous was the timing. It coincided with heightened security measures at Newman Enterprises following Claire Newman's increasing presence in Victor's circle, and any slip-up could trigger alarms that would bring Victor himself crashing down on them. Kane thrived on this razor's edge, but Phyllis could feel the tension in her chest, knowing one wrong keystroke could undo them both. Meanwhile, Audra Charles found herself in the crosshairs of Nate's relentless demand for truth. After confessing that she had been hired by Victor to sabotage Claire and Kyle, and admitting to her manipulations with Kyle, she pivoted toward the bombshell about Kane and Phyllis, almost as if revealing one crime might make the others seem less damning. But Nate was no fool. He could see the pattern, the selfish calculus in every choice she made, and his disappointment radiated more than his anger. Nate told her plainly that trust wasn't something she could rebuild with crocodile tears. His voice was firm yet measured as he explained that she couldn't simply trade secrets to buy his forgiveness. Real remorse had to come from her willingness to stop playing games altogether. For a moment, Audra tried to argue. She insisted that she had been manipulated by Victor, that she only kissed Kyle to maintain leverage, and that her knowledge of Kane's project came more from happenstance than intentional betrayal. But Nate wouldn't let her wriggle out of it. He continued to press, asking her how long she had known, how much information Kane had shared with her, and why she hadn't come forward sooner. Backed into the corner of her own lies, Audra finally admitted that she'd overheard Kane and Phyllis during one of their meetings and pieced together enough to know they were plotting a cyber-offensive against Newman Media. She hadn't told anyone because, in truth, she thought she might be able to use that knowledge later, either as leverage against Kane, or as a bargaining chip to keep her place in the Newman orbit. Nate's expression hardened at that revelation, and the disgust in his eyes cut Audra deeper than any raised voice could. "So you only tell the truth when it benefits you," he said, his words laced with finality. "And that's not honesty, that's survival." The statement shattered Audra's confidence because it was true. She had always lived in survival mode, twisting truths and bending loyalties to ensure she was never left powerless. But Nate's rejection of that approach threatened her at the core, because he wasn't just another ally or business partner, he was the one person whose respect she truly wanted. As she tried to hold his gaze, she saw the possibility slipping away, the realization that he may never look at her the same way again. In the hours that followed, Nate withdrew into thought, weighing his options. He considered warning Victor directly about Kane and Phyllis, but the idea of aligning himself too closely with Victor left a bitter taste. He had been burned once before when Victor manipulated him during corporate wars, and he wasn't eager to fall into that trap again. He also considered going to Devon or Lily, but he knew that dragging Chancellor Winters into Kane's mess would create fallout that could destroy business alliances already under strain. What gnawed at him most was the awareness that by knowing Audra's confession, he was now complicit in a secret he hadn't asked to carry. Meanwhile, Kane and Phyllis pushed forward with the next phase of their plan. After successfully breaching one of Newman Media's satellite servers, Phyllis discovered troves of confidential memos and project proposals, some of which could destabilize deals if released at the wrong moment. Kane directed her to copy the files and quietly alter metadata so that a paper trail pointed not to them but to a rival firm in Chicago. Phyllis hesitated, questioning whether framing another company would escalate things too far, but Kane's icy stare silenced her doubts. He reminded her that we win by making them chase ghosts while we take what matters, and that we don't win by playing safe. She was shocked by his brutality, but it also reminded her of the reason she agreed to work with him. Kane was not afraid to destroy relationships if it meant rebuilding from the ashes. The deeper they went, the more entangled Phyllis became in his vision, and though part of her knew she was crossing a line she could never uncross, another part relished the thrill of being indispensable again. Audra reenacted her conversation with Nate over and over in the town, pondering whether she should have stopped at Victor's confession and excluded Kane. But she knew that if she hadn't told Nate about Kane, he would have seen through her eventually, and withholding would have only made things worse. Still, the cost of honesty was steep. She could feel Nate slipping away, his trust eroding with every word she'd spoken. She didn't miss the irony because she had always taken great pride in her ability to control men and keep them around her finger. However, when it came to Nate, the more she tried, the less it worked. He valued integrity too much to be swayed by charm or desperation. She was now on her own and had to deal with the real possibility that she had not only lost Nate but also given him information that could have ended her tenuous alliances with Victor and Kane. In Genoa City, secrets rarely stayed buried, and she knew it was only a matter of time before someone else discovered what she had revealed. Her thoughts were racing with possible outcomes. Nate might expose her, Kane might retaliate for betraying him, or Victor might cut her off completely once he realized she had cracked under pressure. Despite these worries, A small part of her still hoped that Nate would see her confession as a step toward redemption rather than the final nail in their relationship's coffin. Meanwhile, Claire Newman and Kyle Abbott continued navigating the strain Victor's manipulations had caused, unaware that Audra's confession to Nate had vindicated Claire's suspicions. Claire had always believed Audra was planted in her life to tear her and Kyle apart, and though she hadn't been able to prove it, she had sensed the invisible hand guiding Audra's actions. Now, Nate's decision to tell Claire the truth could alter everything, not only for Kyle and Claire but also for the entire Newman family because it would reveal Victor's interference in the background. If Claire turned her rage on Victor for using Audra against her, this looming revelation threatened to internalize the Newman family's fracture. And in the background of it all, Kane and Phyllis continued to advance, step by step, toward a takeover that could tilt the balance of power in Genoa City. They got closer to a time of reckoning with each file that was stolen, false information planted, and false trail left behind. But despite his cleverness, Kane had underestimated one thing. Audra's confession to Nate had already severed the fragile veil that held his project together. Kane's carefully constructed house of cards was now visible to someone who valued truth over manipulation and who could decide at any time to bring it all down, regardless of whether Nate chose to act immediately or wait. Kane thought he was in control, but as was typical in Genoa City, fate had other ideas. The storm that Kane had been orchestrating so meticulously was on the verge of breaking wide open, though he remained unaware that a crack had already appeared in the foundation of his carefully guarded project, courtesy of Audra's desperate confession to Nate. For Kane, the mission was entering its most critical stage. Phyllis had successfully extracted a list of sensitive vendor contracts, including a Newman Media project linked to overseas investors, and Kane was already scheming how to weaponize it. His strategy consisted of two parts. First, he intended to conceal certain portions of the documents in order to stoke suspicion between Newman Media and its partners, and second, he intended to entice anyone foolish enough to believe they could buy their way into his trust by dangling the remaining files. This wasn't just about data theft, it was about destabilization, and Kane knew that once Newman Media was rocked by a breach of this magnitude, Victor would overreact, and the Abbott family would inevitably get drawn into the mess as collateral. Even though Phyllis was thrilled by her own success, she started to wonder how far Kane planned to take this war. She had initially interpreted this as an opportunity to demonstrate her worth and reclaim her status as an indispensable individual. However, as she delved deeper into the situation, she came to realize that Kane was not merely conducting a test. Rather, he was initiating a chain reaction that had the potential to devastate entire empires. She finally confronted him late one night, her voice sharp as she asked, "How far are you planning to go, Kane? Because this doesn't feel like strategy anymore, it feels like scorched earth." Kane's response was chillingly composed. "Occasionally, the only way to win is to burn everything down and start over. That's the only way they'll ever respect me again." His words lingered with her, a reminder that loyalty to Kane might mean following him into the abyss. Nate was still debating whether to reveal what he had learned from Audra's confessions across town. Exposing Kane's project might prevent a cyber attack from spiraling out of control, but it would also reveal Audra as the source, making her vulnerable to Kane's inevitable rage. Even though Nate wasn't in the business of protecting liars, he couldn't help but think that Audra's safety might be in jeopardy if Kane found out Audra had betrayed him. He decided to test her sincerity one last time, meeting her in the park under the pretense of a casual conversation. There, Nate pressed her once more, this time asking about herself rather than Kane. Did she feel bad about siding with Victor over Claire? Was it wrong of her to use Kyle as a pawn? Did she regret sitting on information about Kane until her back was against the wall? Audra's answers were halting and inconsistent, her eyes flickering with the fear of losing Nate entirely. Nate shook his head and told her that integrity and survival were not mutually exclusive, rejecting her attempt to portray her actions as the decisions of a woman forced into survival. He said quietly, "You think you're protecting yourself by lying, but all you're doing is proving to everyone that you can't be trusted, even by the people who care about you." He said this to her. Audra didn't try to argue, for once, because his words hit hard. Instead, she whispered that she wanted to change and not be the manipulative, self-serving woman that everyone expected her to be. However, Nate only sighed, his silence indicating that the harm had already been done. And yet, even in his disappointment, He couldn't ignore the urgency of the information she'd given him.